Welcome to the Wall Street Lab podcast, where we interview top financial professionals and deconstruct their practices to give you an insider look into the world of finance.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wall Street Lab podcast. Our guest today is none other than Paul Smith, the president and CEO of the CFA Institute. Paul has been the CEO for almost 5 years and is actually leaving his post in September of 2019. So we're actually very glad that we had a chance to speak to him before he stepped down. And we talked about a lot of different topics, including some of his greatest challenges in running the CFA Institute, the future of the investment management industry, his vision for the organization, and the reason why he thinks it's important to have a continuous professional development requirement for CFA charter holders, and why he thinks investment professionals should strive to become CFA charter holders. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank a former professor of mine, Professor James Spengers, who is a CFA charter holder, and through his incredible sense of humor and talent back in the day, he sparked my interest in the finance profession, and I'm grateful to him to have done that and honored to be here today and having had the chance to speak to Paul. So if you like what you hear, as always, please make sure to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, as it really helps us grow the audience. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview with Paul Smith. Hello, Paul. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us here at the Wall Street Lab. It's a true honor and pleasure to have you on. So I guess let me start by asking you a little bit about your background and what is it that made you become the CEO of the CFA Institute?
Okay. Well, I started out my professional career as a chartered accountant in London, in England, working for Pricewaterhouse, and then went from there into asset management, actually in Paris in France, which was great fun, really enjoyable. I spent 4 years there in France and then moved with that company back to the UK, where I became the managing director of that business at a relatively young age. So ran that for 6 years and then was offered a job in Hong Kong with a Bank of Bermuda, that was my service provider at the time in my asset management company, and they asked me to come out and run security servicing for them in Asia. So I did that very happily through until when we sold that bank to HSBC. I moved to New York at that point, worked for HSBC for 2 or 3 years there, and then set up my own business back in Hong Kong as a financial advisor, effectively, to high net worth families. Did that for half a dozen years, and then the CFA was looking for someone in Asia who had commercial experience, who was obviously very familiar with Asia. By that time, I'd been working in Hong Kong for about 18 years, so I guess I qualified as far as that was concerned. And it sounded great fun. At the time, I was traveling a lot of intercontinental flights from Hong Kong to the States to Europe, and I was getting a bit fed up with that, and I wanted to reconnect with Asia, so it came at a perfect time as far as I was concerned. My business was okay, but it wasn't particularly exciting, and so I was able to sell that business and move into a new role with CFA, running Asia for them, giving me a much more Asian-focused opportunity to reconnect with the region. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I came into the CFA. I was then very fortunate in that my boss retired 2 years after I got there. Mm-hmm. I reported into the global head of the organization. He retired, and the board of governors asked me to step into his shoes. So that was January 2015, and I've been the CEO ever since.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you were fed up with the travel in your previous role, but it doesn't look like you travel much less today.
No, I don't. That's true. But in fact, I must travel 280 to 300 days a year. So I do a huge amount, and most of it is intercontinental. So I failed on that score, but I guess the travel is slightly different. In the old days, it was very much trying to build a business, trying to sell myself and the services I was offering. And that's, as I'm sure you know, that's quite stressful when you're cold calling, you're turning up to meetings where you're relatively poorly known, and you're trying to give a good account of yourself. CFA traveling is a different order. It's a lot physically, but it's not mentally in the same bracket, in that typically I'm going to see friends. I'm going to see the societies of CFA around the world, their contacts in country, whether that's universities, regulators, or employers. And so it's a much kinder form of travel, if you like, in that you're going to meet people who you really enjoy spending time with, who are very pleased to see you. You're going to meetings where there's a certain amount of pre-warm-up, if you like, so you don't have to be as stressed as you are when you're on the road as a salesperson, really. So yes, it's been a lot, slightly counterintuitive in terms of what I said earlier, but it's been enormous fun. It's been a great privilege and honor. I've gone to places in the world where I otherwise would never have had the chance to go.
Okay, so I read that you're leaving your position at the end of the year. So why are you leaving if you're enjoying it so much?
Well, I told them when I took over as CEO that I would only do the role for 5 years, and I've stuck to that as a promise. So someone was saying to me last night, I'm that rare CEO, someone who actually does what he says, as opposed to anything else. Really, because I felt that after 5 years as a CEO, I would have been in the company for 7 years, and I'm turning 60 in a couple of months. Mm-hmm. So I thought, for both of those reasons, I've always been a great believer that after 7 years in a company, you personally grow a little bit stale. The company needs change. Your colleagues, your staff need to change. Your stakeholders need to change. You need to bring in some fresh ideas, younger blood, people who can possibly, repoint the organization, not, I hope, not change the strategy, but I'm sure some of the tactics will change. And, I think that's a good thing. I think one of the problems in the world is that CEOs tend to hang on for too long. They're in a position where it's very hard for people to tell them to go, particularly in the not-for-profit. And you have to be a little bit more self-disciplined than that. And although I am enjoying it partway through, we're going to talk about continuing professional education later. We're only partway through some really big initiatives. But I think 5 years in the role, 7 years in the company, it's time to let someone have a go.
Mm. And when you took your position 5 years ago, what were some of the biggest challenges that you had back then?
Well, I think the biggest two challenges really were trying to, which are linked to some extent. Firstly, trying to make the organization a little more externally focused. Problems in the not-for-profit is that you tend to become very inwardly focused. You don't have commercial pressures on you. So, people tend to focus on what they think is valuable rather than on what your stakeholders think are valuable, because the stakeholders can't bring enough pressure to bear in a not-for-profit to make a not-for-profit really think stakeholder first, internal forces second. And so I think that's been my biggest contribution, is to try and make us focus much more sharply on what our stakeholders require. And then linked to that, one of our stakeholder groups is our societies, is the collection of CFAs around the world. We have a structure whereby if we have childholders in any one country, or in the US in any one state, then we encourage them to gather together to form an entity, a society, which we then support and whose function is really to try to positively impact the professional financial services industry in their location, to raise professional standards effectively in the asset management industry. And so societies, for me, are an absolutely vital delivery mechanism of our mission. And I thought we were supporting them very poorly, that they had great natural advantages. They're on the ground. They're full of volunteers, people who are passionately committed to our mission, passionately committed to trying to raise professional standards. And it was a bit of wasted leverage, really, wasted talent and opportunity in the markets. And so what I did immediately coming in was really to refocus the organization in terms of the financial and material support, in terms of research, event management, types of resource to help them be more impactful in their communities. And that's worked out very well for us, I think. through the societies, we've been able to magnify our impact and localize our impact in a way that we weren't doing before I arrived. So those would be the two things linked, as I say, external stakeholder focus and really trying to better support, better leverage our society network globally.
Okay. So what I hear is you improved the support for the existing societies, but has the growth of the number of societies been a goal for you, or is that not part of the strategy?
Definitely a goal, the growth of the numbers of societies, yes.
Okay.
In that we're now represented in about 80 countries worldwide, and I think there are about 200 odd countries in the world. So although we're a very large organization, a very global organization, there's still plenty of the world to conquer, particularly in Africa, where I think there are just so many exciting opportunities with the development of those markets and the sheer numbers of young people who are living in Africa, and really the scale of the work that needs to be done, and that those markets are developing fast and require really good, ethical financial services professionals to help them achieve their financial potential. So it's very exciting and I think globally important work. And so growing societies in Africa and other parts of the world where the financial services industry is less well developed has been very much a plank of our strategy. So
I live right outside of Berlin in Germany, and there is no CFA Society here. And the flight to Frankfurt it's not far, but it's not close enough that you can just hop in a plane and go to a meeting. So what is it that you tell members that they can do if they want to open a society in their city?
Right. Well, typically we need a community of about, it's got to be self-sustaining. So it needs to be really somewhere between 60 and 100 charter holders in the location. And it needs to have the potential to grow beyond that, or else really it's just not a sustainable vehicle. Unfortunately, in the Berlin area today, you can count the numbers of charter holders on the fingers of two hands, basically. So I'm no expert on Berlin, although I've been many times. The development of investment management and financial services in general in Berlin is not, or in the region is not particularly great. So we have more charter holders in Frankfurt, as you say, Munich, Hamburg, Cologne, in Western Germany than we do in Berlin, unfortunately. So our activities in Germany, although we do things, and I have actually gone to Berlin on behalf of CFA Institute, so we do events in Berlin, but they're few and far between. That's absolutely fair comment. So what the German Society does, which is headquartered out of Frankfurt, which is a huge job, as really your question is pointing at, what the German Society is trying to do is to cover the country from Frankfurt. That's a big job. Germany is a huge and variegated country, as I don't need to tell you, with lots of different regional issues. And so that's tough. But trying to cover it through, it's a great example, really, because trying to cover Germany through the society in Frankfurt has its problems. But imagine trying to cover Germany from Charlottesville in Virginia, where our headquarters is. So supporting the Frankfurt-based German society today is the best that I can do. Hopefully, as our community in Germany grows and thrives, and hopefully in Berlin, then that will give us an opportunity to change the way that we structure ourselves in Germany and hopefully bring services closer to you in Berlin. So that's a long-term view. It's no short-term help to you in that sense, but hopefully over time, if we can be successful, then we'll serve you better.
Okay, great. Well, I read an article that you wrote summarizing your speech at the last CFA Institute conference, and one of the topics that you touched on was continuing education and the fact that you believe that CFA charters would need mandatory continuing professional development. Can you maybe explain what you mean?
Yes, very definitely, and with great pleasure. This is a subject that I'm passionate about. What our mission at the Institute is to lead a profession, is to lead the investment profession. And when you stop and you think about professionalism and what does it mean to be a professional, I guess there are a couple of points that I would want to make. Firstly, it's not something that you self-declare. Profession is a contract between society and the individuals who are practicing that profession. The easiest way of sort of thinking about that is to think about doctors. Society decides that medicine is a profession. And in return for that, what society does is it builds a fence around that profession. It stops just anybody declaring themselves to be a doctor. You have to have a license. You have to get a credential. And more importantly, what you have to do is you have to continuously prove to your patients and to society that you are still qualified to continue to practice medicine. Because, as we all know, most doctors qualify in their late 20s. And when you're my age, when you're 60 years of age, what's to say, how are you to know as a patient that that doctor has been working hard over the intervening 32 years or 30-odd years to keep themselves current? And so society insists that professionals prove to them that they have kept themselves current through mandatory continuing professional education. So when I look at our aspirations as an organization, and I mean that, aspirations, I don't believe we're a profession today. I think we're well on the way to being a profession. We have an excellent credential. We have very good professional conduct requirements, high ethical standards. But the piece that we're missing is mandatory continuing professional education. We haven't formalized our side of that contract with society, that we pledge to society to keep ourselves current at all times, to keep ourselves on top of the latest developments in investment management. And so that's why I'm passionate about it. If we're to be consistent in our aspiration, then mandatory continuing education is absolutely essential. If we fail to accomplish that, then we have to ask our members to vote for it. If we fail to accomplish that, then really I think we're sending a signal to our clients and to societies and to society at large that professionalism is not something that we really believe in. Doesn't mean that we're not good at our job, but not worthy of being employed. But it does mean that the way that we think about ourselves is rather more as a club, if you like, as a profession. And that's the distinction that I'm trying to make.
How do you prevent that from happening? Because, I mean, at least from my perspective, the feeling I have is, people spend 3 years of their lives studying a lot to pass 3 exams so that they can call themselves a charter holder. And then, as you said, you become part of this club and you recognize each other. You recognize the charter holder when you see one, but the true value of being a charter holder is difficult for me to grasp. Is it the difficulty of the exam that makes it valuable, or is it the community? Where do you see the value?
Well, I think all of the above. I mean, obviously, every profession has to have a test, a tough credential going in, because again, the public has a right to demand a certain level of skill, and I think that's really when, in a bigger picture sense, that's one of the reasons I think why financial professionals in general have a well-deserved poor reputation. It's because we don't insist, not just in the investment management world, which is my particular area of focus, but in the financial services world in general, we don't insist on high standards of credentialing for people who are doing such vital work as far as society is concerned, which is looking after society's finances. There's very, very few higher callings than that. It's absolutely essential to people's well-being and to helping societies grow and thrive. But we don't, as a body of people, we don't take that obligation seriously enough in terms of the credentialing requirements that we set going in to a profession. But that's only the part of it. That's only the ticket to ride, if you like. It's what you do with your credential, how you put the things that you've learned into practice, that is actually the hard part, the rewarding part, and the piece that you need to focus on to deliver value to your clients. And so so the credential is a point in time. Yes, it's hard work, but so is any credential. You ask a lawyer, you ask an accountant, you ask a doctor. They'll all tell you that the entry exams were significant hurdles because a profession is trying to prove to its clients, to society, that it's doing something that's very valuable, that not everybody can do, and that in return for that, that profession requires some protection from society, from people who are less well qualified, who will damage society's confidence in those people who have bothered to acquire the right standard of education. And so we're passionate in the CFA community that the standard of education that we demand is the standard of education that every investment management professional should have. And it is a disgrace, really, that only about 10% of people in the investment management world have a qualification like the CFA or similar to the CFA. And that's not just our fault. That's the regulator's fault. That's government fault. Government doesn't set through its regulators, through securities regulators, doesn't set a sufficiently high standard for people who practice investment management. And that's something that we speak very powerfully on. We try and lobby government all over the world to try to protect society by setting high standards of entry into the investment management world. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to have a charter, but people should have equivalent level designations if they want to aspire to look after other people's money. And that's a significant responsibility that should be taken seriously. But society doesn't insist upon it, really because the narrative of our profession has failed to convince society that what we do is vitally important to society's best interest.
How would you gauge your success so far in convincing governments to make the standard for professionalism in the investment management industry higher than it really is today?
Patchy, frankly. Some spots of success, I suppose. In about 40 countries around the world, charter holders are advantaged in regard to other professionals in the financial markets, in that if you have a charter, you are able to enjoy some form of waivers from local licensing exams. So we have success in about 40 markets worldwide in terms of regulatory waivers from local exam conditions. But that's not the same as saying that the regulator has actually raised the bar in its own examination process to the level where CFA sets it at. And on that conversation, we have not been successful, frankly. And I think there are a couple of reasons around that. One is that regulators around the world realize that the CFA qualification is an extremely tough one, and that not all financial professionals operating in the marketplace would be able to accomplish or want to accomplish that level. And so if they were to set their own standards of entry, their own examination process as high as the charter, then they would exclude a significant chunk of professionals from the marketplace, and they're unwilling to do that. And there are commercial reasons why they're unwilling to do that as well, not just business reasons. Remember that most securities regulators hold local licensing exams for which they charge. And so they have a business imperative, which I don't think the general public realizes, that the regulator also runs a business and has a conflict of interest in terms of the quality of the exams that they offer. They need to keep their finances ticking over, and to do that often they have to compromise between the standard that they know they should be setting and the standard that actually they do set. So I think that's one of the sort of the dirty little secrets of finance globally, and it contributes, I think, to the lack of trust that the public has in us, because we don't hold ourselves, the regulator doesn't hold ourselves to sufficiently high standard.
You've written before about the fact that we as an industry need to talk less about ourselves and focus on the public and our clients more. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, I think the problem with charter holders particularly is that we're a very technically focused group of people. We passionately care about our craft, really, and so we enjoy talking to one another about that. We enjoy the intricacies of what we do. We enjoy the techniques of what we do, and we're very comfortable, happiest, in fact, talking to one another about the challenges that the markets present to us, because those are the things that really get us up in the morning. Those are the exciting things that get us up in the morning. And the end result is we've become, in terms of our narrative about what we do, we've become a little bit disassociated from the point of what we do, which is to serve our clients. And we need to reconnect a little bit in that regard. We need to force ourselves not to just sit in forums, sit in events and conferences where only charter holders are present. We need to build good bridges, good links with other professional bodies. And just as importantly, we need to appear in events, opportunities, press, physical events, in places where the general public are, because we have a job of work to do, which is connecting some of the things we've been talking about. What we need to do is to connect in the public's mind the fact that what we do is actually really, really important for them. And they need to take more notice of it, and they need to be much more focused on the quality of individual who's advising them on their wealth requirements. And we're not going to do that if we just talk to ourselves, basically. It's a sales job in many regards, although, obviously that's a phrase that's freighted with a lot of negativity. But we do have to get out there and we do have to promote ourselves to the public. And we have to say to the public, irrespective of what you may have come across or may have read about in terms of the financial services industry, there are some really great people out there, and they're called CFA charter holders, and you need to go find one, and you need to make sure that the people who are looking after your money have the proper qualifications to do that job.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the growth in the number of candidates over time. I read that the very first examination in 1963, there were 284 candidates. And as of last year, I believe the numbers that I have here are 319,000 candidates globally. I'm sure that there has been some growing pains and growing so quickly. Can you maybe talk about the pros and cons? I mean, I understand the pros of that, but what has been some of the difficulties in growing so quickly?
Well, I'm obviously boring logistical and operational difficulties, because most of that growth, or a large element of that growth, is outside of the United States, which was our home base. So obviously the sheer physicality of an operational challenge of growing a business. We offer the exams in basically 160 countries around the world. So that's an enormous operational undertaking. So that's the obvious thing to say. But I think the second thing that I would say is that it's a challenge to make sure as a professional that you're attracting the right sort of person into the profession. We need to talk often much more powerfully about what it means to be a charter holder, what it means to be a profession, so that we make sure that the young people who are attracted into what we do understand the obligations really that they're taking on. And so I think that's been the hardest part for us, is to make sure that the quality of candidates coming through is correctly motivated. And that's difficult to do when you're operating in 160 countries. Obviously, there are language barriers to getting that message across. It's not as straightforward as all of that. So I think that's been the largest challenge that keeps me awake at night, is how do we make sure that we are bringing into this profession young people who understand that serving your clients, that being very client-focused is what we expect. It's not just about trying to build a successful, financially rewarding career for yourself. First and foremost, what we want are people who are very, very focused on client service and on doing a good job as far as their clients are concerned. So I think that's for me been been the major drawback, if you like, to, it's a strange thing to say, but the major drawback to growth has been making sure that we get that message through in multiple cultures around the world, multiple languages around the world, so that people can really, or that we can make sure that we're attracting the right people into the profession. So growth for itself, growth just, it's great to have good numbers, but we don't ever set those as our performance targets. We look at growth as being a derivative of doing our mission successfully. So if we are having positive impact upon the communities that we serve, we believe, and I think our growth proves that, we believe that we will attract young people to us and the right sort of young people, because they'll realize that we offer them a career that's going to be rewarding in every sense. So for us, growth is a derivative of executing the mission correctly. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw that the largest number of candidates come from Asia Pacific, China most specifically.
Yes.
At least it looks for me from the outside that the markets have become so competitive, especially in Asia, that the CFA charter is no longer nice to have. In some places, it has become a requirement. So you see ever younger groups of people taking the exams just to make sure that they're competitive enough in the marketplace. And on the other hand, I saw that you have 20 societies in APAC, whereas you have over 90 in the Americas. And as you see the number of members grow in Asia, and you still have a fraction of the number of societies that you do in the US, at some point you're probably going to create a logistical problem. Are you planning to grow the number of societies in Asia as well?
Yeah, no, that's a fabulous question, and you've said everything that needs to be said. There's a difference obviously between candidates and members. So yes, we have lots of candidates in Asia, but as you know, that process is a minimum of 4 years. It's not just 3 years of exams, but you also need 4 years of relevant professional experience. So it's a long process, it's a long pipeline from candidate to member. And there's a lot of people who drop out along that journey, along the way. And so having great candidate numbers for sure is a future predictor of members, but it's not a predictor of members tomorrow, as it were. Okay. And so, yeah, we are 100% sure that our future, to a large extent, lies in Asia over the next, let's say, 10 or 15 years. And you would expect to see the number of societies in Asia mushroom over that period. And I have a sort of handy little phrase that I sort of think about the membership, which helps me really explain it to my colleagues around the world, is that, America is our today. That's where most of our members are. Asia is our tomorrow, and Africa is our next week. When you roll the clock forward, which you can do as a not-for-profit, 30 or 40 years from today's date, I expect Africa to have overtaken Asia in terms of the numbers of candidates and the pipeline of new members. It's where all of the world's young are going to be in 30 or 40 years' time, and it's where the need for high-quality financial professionals is at its sharpest. So we have this amazing luxury as a not-for-profit of being able to focus 30 or 40 years out. And I'm in Africa next week, for instance. As part of that effort, we're trying to really up our game on that continent, because we see that that's where a large chunk of the world's future lies, and we need to get in there and make sure that it grows up right.
Mm. Are the CFA exams ever going to be offered in different languages other than English? Because I'm assuming that might be one of the barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the barriers. It's a strength and a weakness. The strength is that people in the financial services world recognize that, rightly or wrongly, it's a fact that English is the lingua franca, which is obviously a strange phrase to use in relation to English, but it's the lingua franca. It's the lingua franca of the global financial community. And so it's an attraction, if you think about it from a non-English speaking young person's perspective. The fact that the exam in English is saying something about them. It's not just saying that they have mastered technical curriculum. it's also saying that they have proficiency in English. So it's killing two birds with one stone as far as they're concerned. And then the follow-up point to that is that, if you're a young person, a young woman in Africa, you want to tell the world, any future employer, that you are as highly qualified as a young man in New York is. And so having one global standard, one exam, one language is an extremely powerful draw card as far as the exam is concerned. Mm-hmm. Now, that may change. I can posit a theory that in 40 years' time, as we all can, that Chinese is going to be the lingua franca of the world, in which case the exam will have to be in Chinese. And that would be a direction that we would have to move in. Today, people want to prove English proficiency. The world of finance works in English, but that may not be the case in 30 or 40 years' time.
Okay. The topic of this year's conference was disruption. So I thought I'd ask you what were some of the key takeaways, and for us as investment professionals, what is it that we need to do in order to remain relevant in 5 to 10 years' time?
Yeah, obviously disruption comes in all sorts of things, all sorts of different directions. The environment, ESG, for instance, diversity, all of those things are challenging to us and are trends that we think that we need to be in front of, that the finance profession has an obligation to help the world resolve some of its problems, and environmental, social, and governance issues are part of those difficulties. So we need to be the forefront of efforts to recognize the role that finance plays in trying to help solve some of those challenges. We feel that the inputs into our industry for us to be sustainable, we need to have a much more diverse industry than we do today. We have very low levels of gender participation, and in certain countries, very low levels of multi-ethnic participation as well. And so we feel strongly that cognitive diversity is a big driver of investment performance. Mm-hmm. And if we wish to do a better job, we need to get more diversity into the profession. But then finally, and most obviously, as far as everybody is concerned, is technology, is financial technology, and the way that artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics are changing the way that, changing the tools, really, that our profession has at its disposal. It doesn't change the end result, doesn't change the objective of what we try to do, but it does change the business model often, and it certainly provides you with enhanced capability of doing the job. And so when people think about disruption, they often think about disruption negatively. What we're trying to do, and what we try to do at the conference, is to say that actually disruption is an extremely positive force in our world, because it's going to enable us to be scalable and therefore bring our services at a cheaper rate to our clients. It's going to help us be much, much more transparent than we are today in the way that we add value for clients, and the way that we charge, and the way that we perform. And then finally, it's going to help us be consistent as well, which I think has been a struggle for our profession, that often you find that similar clients are advised in different ways. So I think scalability, transparency, and consistency are some of the things that financial technology offers us that will be enormous positives. And then when you look at the actual manufacture of an investment recommendation or an investment strategy, artificial intelligence obviously helps us move that on to the next level. So when we think about disruption, we should be thinking about it positively, and we should be thinking about the golden egg, if you like, which is trying to marry machine learning, financial technology with human skill. And the humans bring to that judgment, expertise, experience, and obviously the ability to communicate and to solve human-centric problems in a way that machines today, anyway, are not capable of, and I don't think, frankly, will be capable of in the foreseeable future. So that was kind of the theme of the conference: ESG, diversity, financial technology, all things that as a profession we need to face up to if we're to do a better job. And I think the sense of the conference, and very much the way that we were trying to pitch this, is that this is a great moment to be a financial professional. This is a really exciting moment to be a financial professional, where the opportunities in front of us to prove our worth to society have never been more obvious, more exciting, more accessible than they are today.
Mm-hmm. You touched on one point, ESG, and I work for a single family office, and we invest on behalf of one foundation, for example, and we think very carefully about ESG. We've had many discussions internally. We talk to managers that we invest in, that they have to invest in a responsible way. But there is one risk that we run of having ESG just being a checking the box exercise in the investment process. Is the CFA Institute, are you planning to be more active in terms of really advising professionals on how to implement ESG as part of the investment process and part of what they do?
Well, another great question. Yes, is the short answer. Easy to say, unfortunately harder to do. So what we're trying to do is to think in how we can develop global investment performance standards, GIPS, which, as you know, is the institutional standard for performance reporting, how we can develop GIPS into the ESG world. So that's the bigger picture of where we think we should be contributing. So we're embarking now upon an outreach exercise really to the industry at large, people such as yourself, to say, well, how can we structure that? How can we extend GIPS to help in this area in exactly the way that you described? How can we help guide financial professionals towards a common understanding of what managing portfolios in an ESG responsible fashion or an ESG fashion, what that really means, and how they can prove that their portfolios are compliant with a set of global standards. So that's the job of work. I think there's very few things that are more important on our agenda going forward, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's something that's going to take quite a while. We want to make sure that what we do is what the industry wants and what our clients are going to find valuable, rather than just adding to what's quite a noisy and busy field at the moment of people trying to add value in this area. So we want to make sure that we get it right. But yes, it's an obvious area for us to take a responsibility in.
Mm. One question about, I was looking at the annual report and it shows that you have a portfolio of investments, and I realized that most of what you invest in is in passive strategies. Does that say anything about the CFA Institute's opinion on active management?
No, it doesn't. It's really the reason we invest in passive funds is that if we were to choose active managers, our members are all active asset managers. If many of our members are active fund managers. So if we were to choose an active fund manager, then we would be facing endless questions from our membership as to why they hadn't been chosen, why their performance is better than anybody else's performance, etc., etc. So passive portfolio is a more sustainable way, a less controversial way, if you like, of running our reserves. So that's really that is the reason why we choose to do it that way, just so that we can make sure that we're being as even-handed with our membership as we possibly can. Otherwise, I think we would spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to explain to various of our members why they hadn't been chosen as an active manager to our assets.
That makes sense. And the last question I have for you, Paul, is, I guess it's a two-part question. One is, what would you tell people that are thinking about taking the CFA exam? And two, what is it that we can do as members to be better members going forward?
Right. Well, that's another great question. Well, I've said what I wanted to say to future candidates and future members is that, remember, what you're doing is entering a profession, and a profession is marked out by service to your clients. And again, think about a doctor. If you ask a young woman who is entering into her medical studies why it is that she's entering into those medical studies, one of the first two things out of her mouth would be, because I want to help people, because I want to serve my patients. And those are the people that we want in the financial services world. We want people who are motivated by client service and whose secondary objective is to enjoy a financially rewarding career, and who understand that that objective is best served by doing a great job as far as your clients are concerned. How can you, as a member hopefully of a society, help us? Well, one, make sure you are a member of a society, volunteer for that society, and add value to your community in whatever way most appeals to you. And that could be through policy advocacy, for talking to regulators about some of the changes that are necessary or some of the changes that they're contemplating in their community, helping us hold events, thinking about brand building, thinking about outreach to employers in our communities around how employers can do a more sustainable job in terms of their business models and the way that they run their businesses. And finally, talking to universities about the need to help us work to create the right environment for attracting smart, well-motivated young people into the profession. So university outreach, employer outreach, regulatory outreach, and putting on high-quality continuing professional education events for our members are all areas where any charter holder can really contribute to the growth of our community. If you are, for instance, in somewhere where our society network is not reaching you, then I would say, please make sure you're still a member of the society, because remember that society is doing within your broader world a huge amount of good, and that you should want to be supportive of that, even if that support is in a passive way rather than an active way. So those are the things that I would lay out.
Well, great, Paul. Well, this has been great fun and a true honor for me. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, you're very kind. It's been very good. You asked some really good questions, and I'm delighted to have done this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Wall Street Lab podcast. For the show notes and much more, visit us at www.thewallstreetlab.com. To see what we're up to before anyone else, subscribe to our newsletter on our website and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
The information contained in this podcast constitutes the opinions of individuals and should not be treated as investment, tax, financial, or legal advice. We take no responsibility for the accuracy of any statements made in this podcast. Any copying, distribution, or reproduction of this podcast without the permission of the creators of the podcast is strictly prohibited.